My rival tried to destroy a gifted violinist's hands. I saved him and got him expelled. 3 years later, I exposed a conspiracy of stolen music that reached the highest levels of our elite conservatory, and the truth was more depraved than I could have ever imagined. I was 13 when my parents disowned me, and it was the best day of my life because that's when they shipped me off to the prestigious Blackwood Conservatory of Music in the Swiss Alps. You see, up until this point, my parents were abusive as hell. So, even being surrounded by prodigies with Stradivarius violins and having constant imposter syndrome was better than living at home. I thought I would be the only one that felt like an outcast until 3 months later when I met my saving grace. It came in the form of a boy with a worn-out instrument case and a nervous energy named Liam. As soon as he walked into the grand hall for the first time, everyone went silent. I was going to ask him to sit beside me and my friends when suddenly my roommate, Adrian, grabbed my arm. Don't. The last scholarship kid we had was caught selling rosin made from cheap plastic. He was expelled. I wanted to tell Adrian I knew what it felt like to not belong, but I also remembered practicing alone in soundproof rooms for my first month before they accepted me. So instead, I just nodded and tried to tell myself that if I had to earn my spot here through hell, so did he. But what they did to him over the next few weeks still keeps me up at night. It started small. The practice rooms were suddenly always booked when he tried to reserve one. Rich kids would accidentally spill water on his sheet music because they knew he couldn't afford to replace the rare prints. And instead of fighting back, he did something even worse. He was kind. When his family sent a small box of local chocolates, he shared them with everyone, including the kids who tortured him. I watched him find a lost metronome worth hundreds of dollars and spend a day asking everyone who it belonged to. It was one of those conservatory situations when you don't know who's telling the truth, so you choose to stay out of it. But then came the Composer's Circle Week. For those who don't know, it's a week where students from founding families can critique the work of non-legacy students, all in the name of tradition. I figured that if I stayed put in the library, then I'd be okay. I was walking back to my dorm at 11 p.m. when 3 legacy students cornered me in the instrument storage basement. Julian stepped out of the shadows holding a heavy, ornate conductor's baton like he'd done this 100 times before. The other 2 legacy kids blocked my exits while he tapped the baton against his palm. Every non-legacy needs to learn their place in the orchestra, he said, his eyes glinting. Hold him, he told the others. They grabbed my arms, and I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think of anything except the sickening crack a bone makes. But suddenly, I heard the high-pitched shriek of the fire suppression alarm. The system kicked on immediately, filling the room with a harmless but disorienting gas designed to protect the priceless instruments. Julian dropped the baton, and it clattered against the stone floor. "Let's go," one of them said. They released my arms and bolted for the exit. Through the swirling mist, I saw Liam standing by the alarm pole station, his hand still on the lever. He helped me up, and we made our way out as security guards rushed past us toward the basement. The next morning, we were called to the headmaster's office. I walked in with my head held high, thinking that Julian would finally get what he deserved. But the headmaster didn't even look at me. He just stared straight at Liam. "Do you have any idea how much a false alarm costs to reset?" he asked, his tone cold and assertive. The disruption to the rehearsal schedule, the paperwork. This is what happens when we let people like you in, the headmaster interrupted him. "You can take the musician out of the street, but you can't take the street out of the musician. One more incident, and you're out." Liam's shoulders dropped as he nodded. We were dismissed. But apparently, Julian is the gift that keeps on giving, because when we left, there he was waiting outside the room with his little entourage. He whispered something to Liam that made him go rigid, then walked away laughing. Liam wouldn't tell me what he said, just hurried off alone. I tried to visit him, but he stayed in his room all day with the door locked. I was eating breakfast when everyone started running out to the hallway. I followed them, thinking there was a fire or something, but the crowd led to Liam's room. Inside, campus security were turning it upside down. Liam stood in the corner with an extremely stoic expression on his face. "Found the stolen manuscript in his desk drawer," the campus guard announced, holding up a rare piece of sheet music. By noon, Liam was expelled. No investigation, no questions, just complete exile. I found Liam that evening behind the dorms, shoving his few belongings into a duffel bag. He was crying, actually sobbing. This kid who stayed kind through everything they did to him was finally shattered. I didn't say anything, just sat there while he cried. After a few minutes, he looked at me with red eyes. "You're the only one who ever tried to be decent to me here," he said, wiping his face. "You deserve to know why this matters so much." He pulled out a crumpled photo from his wallet. A young girl with a violin, smiling brightly. "My little sister. She has a rare nerve condition. Our village back home saved up for years to send me here. I was supposed to become a concert violinist to pay for her surgery." He stood up, slinging the duffel bag over his shoulder. Julian knew all this. That's what he whispered, that my sister would never walk again before I could ever help her. Rage boiled my blood. I spent almost a year wishing someone would break Julian's fingers, but I never knew that someone was going to be me. I watched Liam's taxi disappear into the Swiss mountain fog, then pulled out my phone with shaking hands. My thumbs moved across the screen, typing a message to Julian. "You destroyed an innocent person. This isn't over." Within seconds, a laughing emoji popped up as his reply. Then another, then 5 more in a row. The next morning in the dining hall, Julian held court at his usual table, surrounded by his cello section and various legacy students. I positioned myself at a nearby table, pretending to read a score while secretly recording on my phone. Julian's voice carried across the room as he gestured dramatically, describing how some people just couldn't handle the pressure of an elite conservatory. He never mentioned Liam by name, but his cruel jokes about charity cases and people who don't belong made his meaning clear. Every veiled threat, every mocking laugh, I captured it all. Adrian found me in our room later that afternoon, pacing back and forth while reviewing the recordings. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his face serious. "You need to drop this," he warned, glancing nervously at my phone. "Julian's father is the chairman of the board. Banking, real estate, you name it. You can't win against that kind of money." I ignored his warning and spent that night in the digital music lab, compiling everything I had, the recordings, timestamps, witness accounts I've been gathering. I emailed it all to the school board and Liam's family, hitting send with a sense of satisfaction. The auto-reply crushed that feeling immediately. "All complaints must be submitted through proper administrative channels. Please contact your house advisor for assistance." Morning assembly brought another blow. I tried logging into my student portal to check for responses, but the screen flashed red. Account suspended for inappropriate use of school resources. My stomach dropped as I realized the IT department had already moved against me. Julian cornered me in an empty practice room after assembly, his friend Marcus flanking him like a bodyguard. He held up his phone, showing crystal clear security footage of me entering the music lab the previous night. "Funny thing about having your name on buildings," he said, his smile cold. "People are very helpful when you ask for favors." Back in my room, I discovered the worst part. All my saved recordings had vanished from my cloud storage. Every single file deleted. Marcus later admitted, almost proudly, that he'd convinced building security to let him into the music lab after I'd left. "Just doing some late-night composing," he told them, and they'd handed over the access card without question. The library became my refuge over the next few days, the one place Julian's influence seemed weaker. That's where Isabella found me, sliding into the seat across from mine. She was a year older, daughter of some ambassador with a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions in student government meetings. She leaned forward and whispered that she'd noticed my portal suspension on the public system logs. "I know what Julian's doing," she said quietly, "and I want to help." Julian's retaliation escalated quickly. During lunch, his girlfriend, Astrid, walked past my table carrying a full cup of tea. She stumbled at just the right moment, sending the entire contents cascading over my laptop bag. The tea soaked through immediately, and I could hear the fizzing sound of electronics dying. Astrid's apology was as fake as her concern, delivered with a smirk that matched Julian's. That evening, I found a note slipped under my dorm room door. The handwriting was neat, controlled. "Drop this, or you'll end up like Liam. We know about your psych records from before enrollment." My blood ran cold. Those records were supposed to be confidential, documenting the therapy I'd needed after my parents' abuse. Somehow Julian had accessed them. Isabella proved her worth the next day. She slipped me a USB drive during passing period, her expression carefully neutral. Later, alone in my room, I discovered what she'd been collecting. Her own recordings of Julian's bullying, screenshots of suspicious messages between Julian and Marcus, even some photos of Julian near Liam's room the night before the manuscript was discovered. She'd been building her own case for weeks. The pressure intensified when I received an official email stating my work-study position as a page-turner was under review due to recent campus disruptions. Without that job, I couldn't afford the incidental fees the school loved to charge. It was another calculated move to force me out. Adrian's sudden request for a room change shouldn't have surprised me, but it still stung. He sat on his bed, not meeting my eyes, as he explained. Julian's father had called his parents directly, mentioning how unfortunate it would be if their Swiss residency permits encountered any complications during renewal. Adrian's family had a small music shop in Zurich. They couldn't risk their entire livelihood. Alone in what was now my single room, I started researching. The school newspaper archives were digital, and buried in last year's issues, I found what I was looking for. Another scholarship student had withdrawn after a conflict with Julian. The pattern was right there in black and white, hidden in plain sight. Julian's next move was particularly cruel. He started dating Clara, my sight reading partner for music theory. She was the only one who understood the advanced material well enough to help me prepare for finals. Suddenly, she was too busy with Julian to meet for study sessions, always apologizing with obviously rehearsed excuses. Even the cafeteria staff seemed to turn against me. My special dietary meals, ordered due to severe allergies, started mysteriously disappearing. The workers would shrug apologetically, claiming they must have forgotten to set one aside. The nearest restaurant that could accommodate my allergies was a 20-minute walk into town, expensive and time-consuming. I tried one more official channel, scheduling a meeting with Dr. Elmsworth, the school counselor. She listened to my concerns with a patronizing smile, occasionally making notes that looked more like doodles. When I finished, she leaned back and suggested I might be experiencing adjustment difficulties and paranoid ideation. It wasn't until later that I learned she was dating Julian's uncle. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a mandatory study group for European history, I ended up partnered with Julian's roommate, Daniel. He seemed nervous around me at first, but gradually relaxed as we worked through the material. When he invited me to their room to borrow a textbook, I couldn't resist the opportunity. Julian's side of the room was meticulously organized, everything in its place. While Daniel searched for the textbook, I noticed a leather journal on Julian's desk. My heart pounded as I quickly flipped through it. The pages were filled with names, dates, and notes. Liam, Syrian, sixth sister, scholarship dependent. Previous target, Alex Chun, withdrawn March 2023. He was tracking problem students, documenting their vulnerabilities like a predator studying prey. Astrid must have noticed me spending time with Daniel because she started appearing wherever I went, asking pointed questions about our friendship. Her suspicion was obvious, and I knew she'd report back to Julian about any unusual behavior. The journal had revealed Julian's pattern clearly. Isolate the target, apply pressure through multiple channels, then eliminate them from the school. It was systematic, calculated, and had worked at least twice before. Understanding his methodology didn't make it easier to counter, though. Marcus approached me privately one afternoon near the athletic fields. He looked around nervously before speaking, his usual confidence replaced by visible guilt. He admitted he felt bad about Liam, but was terrified of losing his own scholarship. His family had sacrificed everything to send him here. I saw an opportunity and carefully showed him some of the evidence from Julian's journal, explaining how the targeting system worked. Marcus's face paled as he recognized his own name on one of the lists, marked as potential liability monitor. Julian must have noticed Marcus's changing loyalty because he soon gave him a test. Marcus confided that Julian had asked him to monitor my communications, to report on who I was talking to and what I was planning. The fact that Marcus was telling me this meant something had shifted. The shift became public when Isabella stood up during a student council meeting and directly questioned why Liam had been expelled without proper investigation. The room went silent. The faculty advisor tried to shut down the discussion, but Isabella persisted, calmly listing the inconsistencies in the official story. She didn't accuse anyone directly, but her meaning was clear. Julian watched from the back of the room, his jaw clenched tight. As I walked back to my dorm that night, I felt a strange mix of hope and dread. We were building something. Isabella, Marcus, and I. We had evidence, allies, and the beginnings of a strategy. But Julian had money, connections, and years of experience destroying anyone who challenged him. The real fight was just beginning. Julian's next attempt to discredit me came through social media. Fake posts appeared on Instagram and Twitter with my name attached, spreading vicious rumors about staff members. The posts claimed I'd witnessed inappropriate behavior from teachers, complete with fabricated details that sounded just plausible enough to cause concern. Within hours, concerned parents were calling the school, demanding answers. I recognized the escalation pattern from Julian's journal notes. This wasn't just about silencing me anymore. He was trying to make me radioactive, someone the school would have to remove to protect its reputation. I spent the evening documenting the fake accounts, taking screenshots of metadata that proved they'd been created recently, all from the same IP range. The following morning brought an unexpected ally. Mr. Petrov, the janitor who'd cleaned these halls for 20 years, pulled me aside after breakfast. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he glanced around to ensure we were alone. He explained in broken English mixed with German that he'd seen Julian near Liam's room the night before the manuscript was discovered. He'd been fixing a light fixture in the hallway and watched Julian slip inside with something in his hand. The timing matched perfectly with when Liam had been at a mandatory study session. Clara found me in the library that afternoon, her face flushed with anger. She discovered Julian's journal during one of their study dates, specifically the pages about her. He'd written detailed notes about her academic strengths, her family's financial situation, and how dating her would isolate me from music theory help. She'd confronted him, and his casual admission that she was just a tool had shattered any feelings she might have had. Now, she wanted to help us. I worked with Mr. Petrov to create a written account of what he'd witnessed. We made multiple copies, storing them in different locations around campus. Isabella suggested keeping one with her parents at the embassy, another with a sympathetic teacher, and a third in a safety deposit box in town. We were learning to protect our evidence better. Campus security proved useless when I tried to file a formal report. They explained that without physical evidence, they couldn't investigate retroactively. The planted manuscript was long gone, returned to the archives, according to school policy. The security chief, a man who'd worked at the school for 15 years, seemed genuinely sympathetic but explained his hands were tied by protocol. Our alliance solidified during a late-night meeting in Isabella's single room. Marcus had fully committed after realizing he was on Julian's list of potential problems. Clara brought her own recordings of conversations with Julian, where he'd casually discussed his cleaning house philosophy. We weren't just individuals anymore. We were a coordinated resistance. Research into the previous year's incident revealed disturbing parallels. The scholarship student who transferred, a boy for Vietnam, had experienced the same pattern: isolation, false accusations, sudden departure. His social media had gone dark afterward, but Clara managed to find an old Instagram post where he'd cryptically mentioned, "When power protects power, truth becomes irrelevant." That post went viral within our small community when Isabella reshared it. Other students began coming forward with their own Julian stories. Nothing as dramatic as false theft charges, but a pattern of casual cruelty, destroyed assignments, spread rumors, orchestrated social exclusions. The scope was broader than we'd imagined. I fought the urge to immediately publicize everything we'd gathered. Isabella counseled patience, explaining that we needed an airtight case. One premature move could give Julian's father time to mobilize his resources and bury us. We needed to be strategic, methodical, and absolutely certain. Julian's father's sudden campus visit raised red flags. Officially, it was for a routine donation meeting, but the timing was too convenient. He toured the campus with the headmaster, his presence a clear reminder of the family's financial influence. Several board members joined them for lunch, and Julian made sure to be visible at his father's side, the perfect son. Marcus took a significant risk by recording Julian during a section rehearsal. Julian, feeling safe among his peers, bragged about maintaining the conservatory standards and keeping out those who don't belong. His casual elitism and classism were on full display as he explained how certain people just weren't meant for this level of artistry. Several teammates looked uncomfortable, but none challenged him. Astrid's defection came as a shock to everyone, including Julian. She'd found her own name in his journal, complete with notes about her family's connections and how to leverage them. The realization that she'd been manipulated from the start of their relationship hit hard. She brought us Julian's backup files, which he'd foolishly given her access to when he needed help organizing his college applications. Julian's attempt to buy my silence was almost insulting in its transparency. He approached me after dinner, offering to ensure my graduation with honors if I dropped everything. He could make my college application shine, he promised, with recommendation letters from board members and alumni. All I had to do was stop investigating and convince the others to do the same. My refusal clearly surprised him. He genuinely believed everyone had a price. The files Astrid provided revealed the true scope of Julian's operation. He kept detailed dossiers on dozens of students, categorizing them by threat level and vulnerability. Screenshots of embarrassing social media posts, academic struggles, family financial information, health issues. He'd been building leverage for years. It was blackmail material, pure and simple. We discovered Julian's control network was smaller than it appeared. Beyond his core group of wealthy legacy friends and a few key administrators, his influence relied mainly on fear and assumption. People assumed he had more power than he actually did, and that assumption became self-fulfilling. Once we started mapping his actual reach, gaps became apparent. Marcus's insider knowledge proved invaluable when he revealed Julian kept his most sensitive files on an encrypted cloud service. He'd memorized the password after watching Julian type it repeatedly. We accessed a treasure trove of communications, including emails between Julian and his father, discussing problem students and how to handle them. Isabella's parents' concern reached the school board through diplomatic channels. As ambassadors, they couldn't directly interfere, but they could express worry about bullying patterns affecting their daughter's education. Other parents began asking similar questions, especially after parents' weekend revelations spread through family networks. Our alliance grew stronger through adversity. Late-night strategy sessions in Isabella's room became a refuge where we could speak freely and plan our next moves. We shared our own stories of feeling like outsiders, and I realized none of us really fit Julian's definition of who belonged at the school. That shared experience bonded us. I maintained my principles even when tactical advantages presented themselves. The embarrassing information Julian had collected on innocent students could have been useful leverage, but using it would make us no better than him. We agreed to focus only on evidence of his wrongdoing, not collateral damage to others. Julian's composure began cracking under pressure. During music theory class, when someone mentioned Liam's name, Julian snapped that Liam had gotten what he deserved. Several students heard the comment, and word spread quickly. His mask of plausible deniability was slipping. 5 independent witnesses came forward confirming they'd seen Julian near Liam's room that night. 2 were legacy students who'd remained silent out of fear but couldn't stomach what had happened. Their testimony carried weight because they had nothing to gain and potentially much to lose by speaking out. The cello section's gradual distancing from Julian became noticeable. After Marcus shared the recording of Julian's standard speech, several players began questioning whether they wanted to be associated with those views. Team cohesion fractured as moral lines were drawn. Teachers began noticing patterns they'd previously overlooked. The scholarship students Julian targeted consistently left school, always under suspicious circumstances. Faculty meetings grew tense as educators questioned whether they'd been unknowingly complicit in systematic discrimination. Isabella's connection with an education advocate who tracked boarding school issues opened new avenues. This advocate had been documenting similar patterns at elite institutions across Europe. Our situation wasn't unique, but it was one of the most egregious examples they'd encountered. Julian's desperate attempt to regain control led to revealing conversations. Cornered in the dining hall by questions about Liam, he declared that his father expected him to protect their traditions. The admission that this was about more than personal power, that it was systematic and generational, chilled everyone who heard it. Sympathetic teachers began their own documentation of Julian's behavioral patterns. They couldn't officially act without administrative support, but they could create records that might prove useful later. The French teacher, who'd taught both Liam and the previous expelled student, seemed particularly determined to help. Julian's options narrowed as more students refused to participate in his schemes. His usual tactics of intimidation and bribery failed when people realized they weren't alone in opposing him. The collective resistance made individual targeting harder. Mr. Petrov's revelation about the staff holiday fund exposed another layer of corruption. Julian's family donated generously each year, with implicit expectations of loyalty and silence. Staff members who'd benefited felt compromised, caught between gratitude and growing unease about what they'd overlooked. I chose to show kindness where Julian showed cruelty. When his younger brother struggled with advanced music theory, I offered tutoring despite our conflict. The boy was nothing like Julian, shy, studious, and clearly uncomfortable with his family's methods. Through him, I glimpsed the pressure Julian faced to maintain family traditions. Staff members from across campus shared stories during informal gatherings. The maintenance crew, cafeteria workers, and ground staff had all experienced Julian's casual dismissiveness and occasional cruelty. These stories, while individually minor, painted a picture of someone who saw service staff as beneath consideration. Julian's attempt to turn Clara against me backfired spectacularly. She revealed she'd been recording their conversations for weeks, ever since discovering his journal. His manipulative tactics, casual admissions, and derogatory comments about other students were all preserved. Her technical skills in editing and organizing the recordings proved invaluable. The headmaster's secretary witnessed a crucial interaction between Julian's father and her boss. The father's threats about reconsidering family donations if the situation wasn't handled properly were barely veiled. She couldn't record the conversation, but documented it immediately afterward in detailed notes. Parents' Weekend became a turning point as multiple families learned about Julian's systematic targeting. Students who'd remained silent finally told their parents what had been happening. The revelation that their children had been living in fear of one student's power shocked many families who'd assumed the school provided a safe environment. Our alliance compiled everything into a comprehensive dossier. Testimonies, recordings, documentation, and evidence filled hundreds of pages. Isabella's organizational skills shone as she walked them through the systematic targeting, the planted evidence, and the institutional corruption that enabled it. We made multiple copies, storing them securely. The board meeting scheduled for the following week would vote on new scholarship policies. Julian's father chaired the committee proposing stricter requirements and easier expulsion procedures. The timing wasn't coincidental. This was their attempt to legitimize what they'd been doing unofficially. During morning assembly, Julian's usual confidence wavered as he noticed allied students sitting together. The visual representation of unified opposition clearly unsettled him. His typical smirk faded as he realized his isolation tactics had failed. I grappled with the moral implications of our actions. Victory would mean destroying Julian's future the same way he destroyed Liam's. Despite everything, I couldn't take satisfaction in that prospect. We were seeking justice, not revenge, though the line sometimes blurred. My final attempt at mercy came through a private warning to Julian. I explained that comprehensive evidence existed and offered him a chance to make amends. He could admit wrongdoing, support Liam's reinstatement, and work to change the system he'd perpetuated. His laughter in response sealed his fate. Faculty rebellion erupted during a staff meeting about the proposed scholarship restrictions. Teachers who'd remained silent for years finally spoke out, refusing to support policies that would institutionalize discrimination. The usually controlled environment devolved into heated arguments about the school's values and future. Truth spread through careful one-on-one conversations rather than public accusations. This grassroots approach prevented Julian's father from mounting an effective counternarrative. By the time he arrived for emergency damage control, the story had already permeated the entire campus community. Julian's desperation led to his biggest mistake. While his father met with administrators, Julian attempted to plant contraband in my room, but Marcus had warned me, and I'd set up a camera to record the attempt. Security footage also captured him entering my room with a suspicious package. The evidence was overwhelming. When campus security reviewed the footage, even they couldn't ignore such blatant criminal behavior. The very system he'd manipulated for years had finally turned against him. The former scholarship student from Vietnam agreed to testify about his experience through a video call. His hands shook as he described the systematic harassment, the planted evidence, and the pressure that forced him to withdraw. Isabella's parents arranged a secure connection through embassy channels, ensuring Julian's family couldn't trace or intimidate him. During the emergency board meeting, Julian's father withdrew his donation threat after seeing the compiled evidence. Board members who'd previously deferred to his influence suddenly found their spines when confronted with documentation of criminal behavior. The atmosphere in the conference room shifted palpably as they realized their liability in enabling systematic discrimination. My original friend group gradually reunited around me as truth spread across campus. Students who distanced themselves out of fear began approaching with apologies and offers of support. The dining hall dynamics changed overnight as Julian's usual table emptied, leaving him isolated with only his most loyal followers. Liam's host family in town offered to provide character testimony about his exemplary behavior while living with them. They'd been horrified to learn about the false theft charges and wanted to help clear his name. Their willingness to stand up against the school's most powerful family inspired other community members to speak out. The Alliance presented our evidence compilation to the parent committee during their emergency session. Isabella's organizational skills shone as she walked them through the systematic targeting, the planted evidence, and the institutional corruption that enabled it. Parents who'd assumed their children were safe at this elite institution left the meeting demanding immediate action. Julian's mother arrived on campus after reviewing the evidence at the parent meeting. Her confrontation with her husband in the headmaster's office could be heard through the closed door. She demanded he stop protecting their son from consequences, threatening to expose everything publicly if the family continued obstructing justice. The documentation proved a clear pattern of targeting scholarship students over 3 years. Each case followed the same methodology: isolation, pressure through multiple channels, false accusations, and forced withdrawal. The board couldn't ignore such systematic discrimination when presented with comprehensive evidence. Emergency votes during the board meeting resulted in unanimous decisions to review all scholarship student departures from the past 3 years. The liability concerns alone forced action as parents threatened to withdraw their children and pursue legal remedies if the school didn't address the systematic abuse. Julian's father made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. He threatened to use his connections to destroy my future, claiming he could ensure no university would accept me. His voice carried through the hallway as he ranted about ungrateful scholarship students who didn't understand their place. Several elite universities mysteriously lost my applications over the following days. Admissions offices claimed technical difficulties or missing documents, but the pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. Julian's father's influence reached farther than we'd anticipated, though not as far as he'd hoped. Alliance members received anonymous threats about their own secrets being exposed. Marcus found notes warning about his family's immigration status, while Isabella received messages about her parents' diplomatic assignments. The desperation behind these threats revealed how cornered Julian's family felt. Marcus wavered briefly under the pressure when his parents called, terrified about potential deportation. But after a long night of reflection, he stood firm, recognizing that giving in would only perpetuate the cycle of abuse. His courage inspired others who'd been similarly threatened. The education advocate Isabella's parents had connected us with prepared to release everything publicly if the board didn't act decisively. This threat of external exposure finally motivated the administration to move beyond damage control toward actual reform. Before we could execute that plan, Julian made his critical error. He attempted to intimidate Isabella's diplomat parents directly, not realizing the diplomatic immunity and international implications of threatening embassy staff. This overreach triggered mandatory reporting protocols that took the situation beyond the school's control. Isabella's parents' formal complaint through diplomatic channels triggered an automatic review of all recent expulsions. The Swiss Education Ministry couldn't ignore potential discrimination at an institution hosting international students. The investigation expanded beyond what Julian's father could influence or control. Julian denied everything during his board hearing, claiming we'd orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy against him. But faced with security footage, witness testimony, and his own journal documenting systematic targeting, his denials rang hollow. Even his father's lawyer advised accepting a negotiated resolution. The email review mandated by the diplomatic complaint revealed Julian's father's own communications about maintaining standards and protecting traditions. His messages to board members explicitly discussed keeping out students who didn't fit their vision of the school's culture. These communications proved institutional corruption beyond just Julian's actions. Astrid provided the final crucial evidence when she handed over Julian's journal to the board. His handwritten notes about targeting vulnerable students, complete with detailed plans for each victim, removed any possibility of claiming ignorance or misunderstanding. The board members' faces paled as they read his methodical documentation. The moment of choice arrived when the board offered options: pursue criminal charges with uncertain outcomes, or accept a comprehensive resolution that included Liam's reinstatement, clearing all affected students' records, and implementing systemic reforms. The decision weighed heavily on all of us. I demanded specific conditions for any agreement: Liam's full reinstatement with his scholarship restored, official apologies to all affected students, clearing of all disciplinary records, and structural changes to prevent future targeting. The board, eager to avoid criminal proceedings and publicity, agreed to every demand. Julian's family accepted the terms to avoid media exposure and a broader investigation. Their lawyer negotiated quietly, recognizing that criminal charges for planting stolen property and systematic harassment would destroy Julian's future entirely. The agreement included Julian's immediate withdrawal and his family's commitment to funding expanded scholarship programs. Julian's last manipulation attempt came during the final meeting. He claimed I'd orchestrated everything out of jealousy, that I'd manipulated evidence and turned people against him. But surrounded by witnesses to his behavior and faced with his own documented cruelty, his accusations fell flat. Even his core supporters abandoned him as the evidence became undeniable. Legacy students who'd participated in his schemes distanced themselves, suddenly claiming they'd always felt uncomfortable with his methods. The speed of their betrayal revealed how shallow their loyalty had been. Liam returned to campus 3 weeks later, his full scholarship restored and his record cleared. The school honored his original acceptance to Juilliard's music program, and the admissions office confirmed his spot remained available. His quiet dignity during his return impressed everyone who'd witnessed his unjust expulsion. Julian withdrew from school without fanfare, his family's lawyers handling all arrangements. As part of the settlement, his family endowed a new scholarship fund specifically for refugees, though they insisted on anonymity. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the full story. The headmaster announced his early retirement at the end of the term, citing personal reasons. Several key administrators who'd enabled the systematic discrimination found themselves reassigned or encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere. The old guard's departure opened space for genuine reform. New policies implemented comprehensive protections for scholarship students. Anonymous reporting systems, mandatory investigation protocols, and oversight committees with student representation replaced the old system of deference to wealthy donors. The changes came too late for Liam's suffering, but would protect future students. The Alliance members found ourselves elected to various student leadership positions as our classmates recognized our role in exposing the corruption. I won the student body presidency on a reform platform, supported by a coalition of scholarship students, international students, and even some legacy students who wanted genuine change. 6 months later, at graduation, Liam delivered the salutatorian address. He spoke eloquently about resilience, justice, and the power of standing together against systematic oppression. His acceptance to Juilliard had been confirmed, and his sister's treatment was progressing well, thanks to an anonymous donation that we all knew came from Julian's mother, who'd been horrified by her son's cruelty. The Alliance members remained close throughout our remaining time at school and beyond. Isabella went on to study international law, inspired by her role in seeking justice. Marcus earned a full scholarship to MIT, his confidence restored after standing up to power. Clara pursued journalism, determined to expose systematic injustices. Mr. Petrov received recognition for his courage in speaking truth to power, and the staff felt empowered to report wrongdoing without fear of retaliation. The school transformed gradually but genuinely. Merit began mattering more than money, and diversity became a strength rather than a target. The toxic traditions, like the composer's circle, were abolished. We'd proven that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, but building a better future for those who come after. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I thought about that scared 13-year-old who'd arrived here, fleeing abuse, and a terrified boy who'd pulled a fire alarm to save me from Julian's cruelty. Liam and I had both found our place, not by conforming to their standards, but by refusing to let injustice stand. The school that had tried to break us had instead forged us into people who could change it. Julian's family continued donating to the school, but their influence had clear limits. Now, the board had learned that protecting abusers carried too high a price, and that true excellence meant creating space for all talented students, regardless of their background. It wasn't a perfect ending. Julian faced no criminal charges, and the trauma he'd inflicted couldn't be erased. But we'd broken the cycle, exposed the system, and ensured that no future Julian could operate with such impunity. The most satisfying moment came in a quiet conversation with Liam after graduation. He thanked me for fighting for him when he couldn't fight for himself. I reminded him that he'd saved me first. That night in the basement, we'd both learned that standing up to power was possible when people refused to stand alone. That lesson, more than any diploma, was the education that mattered.